I did a short video talking about the US government slapping the wrist of the Honduran narco-dictator that Washington had supported for years. His name is Juan Orlando Hernández. He's known by his initials JOH or HO. That's how it's pronounced in Latin America. Now, the US government supported HO for years. This was a right-wing drug trafficking dictator who stole 2 elections in Honduras, and he had the support of the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. Well, now, the Biden administration, after slapping him on the wrist and canceling his visa, the Biden administration is trying to extradite this right-wing narco-dictator of Honduras that the U.S. government backed for years and put into power. This is another example in a long history of examples of the U.S. government turning on its own puppets, turning on the very dictators that it supported. This includes going back to Saddam Hussein, who was supported by the CIA, who was given a list of members of the Communist Party of Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was given that list by the CIA, and the CIA helped Saddam Hussein after the Ba'athist coup. The CIA helped Saddam Hussein massacre Iraqi communists. So Saddam was a CIA asset, and then, of course, what happened is that he went against the U.S., and he no longer was useful. So after the U.S. helped Saddam Hussein use chemical weapons and gas Iranians during the Iran-Iraq War, in which the U.S. supported Iraq against Iran, well, by 1990, he had outlived its usefulness. The U.S. turned on Saddam Hussein, and you saw the first Gulf War and then the 2003 war, in which the U.S. committed horrific war crimes and devastated Iraqi civilian infrastructure to remove this authoritarian leader that the U.S. had helped install through a CIA-backed coup and then supported for many years. Well, in Honduras, we see yet another example of this. Here's a report in Causachu News, a great outlet based in Bolivia, friends of the show, about the arrest of Juan Orlando Hernández. And here you can see an image of Juan Orlando Hernández being arrested by the Honduran police. And they note that many Hondurans did celebrate this. So I want to talk about this analysis. I want to analyze the situation here because it's a complicated issue, because the U.S. government should not have the right to extradite people from other countries. They should be tried domestically in their own country. So I'm going to talk about the complex issue of sovereignty, but I do want to make it clear that many people in Honduras are celebrating the arrest of Juan Orlando Hernández because he was so corrupt. He was a narco-dictator. He was involved in trafficking so many drugs. He was involved in neoliberal austerity policies that devastated the economy, that made Honduras the poorest country in Latin America, that fueled mass migration out of Honduras, that made Honduras one of the most violent countries in Latin America. And by the way, all of this was after a US-backed coup in 2009 removed the democratically elected left-wing government of Honduras. So Juan Orlando Hernández was a US puppet. He came to power thanks to a US-backed coup. He stole 2 elections thanks to the backing of the United States. And now Washington has turned its back on its puppet and is taking action against him. So here is video of Hondurans in the street celebrating the arrest of HO, that is JOH, Juan Orlando Hernández. And you can see people dressed up with Honduran flags, and also the red flags are the red flags of the left-wing Libre Party of Honduras. So there are a lot of people, including leftists, who are celebrating the arrest of this former right-wing narco-dictator. But like I said, he was installed thanks to a US-backed coup and was supported by the US. So this is the US, this is the Biden administration claiming to take action against a narco-dictator. And this comes after a propaganda campaign in the Western corporate media in which they tried to portray HO as a Trump ally, as if he was not supported by the Biden administration, by the Obama Biden administration. He actually, his first term in power was under Obama, and he had the full support of the Obama-Biden administration. Here's a report in the Washington Post in February 2021, a year ago. Honduran president, a Trump ally implicated in drug trafficking, tries to win over Biden. Note how they call him Trump ally, but this is ridiculous because, again, he was in power for 2 terms. Ho stole the first election under Obama, and Ho and Obama actually were close allies. He wasn't a Trump ally. He was a U.S. ally. It was totally bipartisan. Here are photos of Juan Orlando Hernández with Obama. He was a U.S. puppet. He was a U.S. ally installed after a U.S.-backed coup in 2009. So the attempt now to rewrite history and portray Ho as just a Trump ally is part of the Biden administration propaganda, part of this campaign that they're doing now by ordering the extradition of Ho to try to portray Ho as only a Republican ally and not also a Democrat ally. He was a U.S. ally. And both parties in the U.S. are tools of U.S. imperialism, instruments of the empire, and they are both controlled by the same capitalist class. They are not different in their imperialist policies. So this is more of the report, and there's an important line from this report from Causation News, which is kind of concerning. And it says that the new left-wing government of President Xiomara Castro seems prepared to hand over Juan Orlando Hernández for extradition because, according to lawmakers from the Libre Party, the Honduran justice system in its weakened state would not be able to carry forward criminal proceedings. So this is actually, I think, something concerning. It's good that there's now action being taken against this U.S.-backed dictator who is responsible for so many crimes against his people. But at the same time, it is not good that he might be extradited to the U.S. because this is going to weaken the sovereignty of countries in Latin America. The Honduran government should be saying to the U.S., look, we can try our own criminals here at home. We don't need the U.S. empire. We don't need the U.S. so-called justice system with mass incarceration, with all of its corruption. We don't need it to take action against our former leaders. We can do it ourselves. And here, the Mexican government deserves credit. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, he did not want a Mexican general extradited to the U.S. named Cienfuegos. And AMLO said that instead this was a domestic concern for Mexico's own affairs. And he accused the U.S. of trumping up the charges. So that's an example of Mexico's left-wing nationalist government saying, no, the U.S. cannot violate our sovereignty by extraditing our officials. We have our own justice system that we can take action against. So that is one concern here that we should be very wary of, is that the U.S. is now trying to punish its own former dictator, its own former puppet that it helped to install in power. And this is part of a pattern here. There is part of a pattern of the U.S. government backing these corrupt authoritarian leaders and the CIA supporting them, and then the U.S. later turning against them and using their crimes to justify intervening in the sovereign affairs of Latin America. Here's an article back in Reuters in 2017. Panama's Noriega, CIA spy turned drug-running dictator. He was backed by the CIA, and then he later became too independent for the United States. And the U.S. government invaded Panama and sent in nearly 28,000 troops to violate the sovereignty of Panama, to kill hundreds of civilians, potentially thousands of civilians, bombing working class barrios, neighborhoods in Panama, violating the sovereignty of Panama in order to go in to arrest this leader that the U.S. had helped put in power, that the CIA backed. That was a blatant violation of Panama's sovereignty, and it was the blatant violation of the human rights and the lives of the hundreds or thousands of Panamanian civilians who were murdered by the United States when the U.S. was trying to remove a dictator it helped put in power. And why? because Noriega he was no longer obedient. He stopped following U.S. orders, just like Saddam Hussein. There's so many examples of this in history. And Noriega was becoming nationalist. He was taking a policy against some U.S. foreign policy. He was going to be in control soon of the Panama Canal. And the U.S. came in and removed him from power, violating Panamanian sovereignty, even though they helped put him in power in the first place. The point I'm making here is that it's good domestically that Juan Orlando Hernández will face consequences inside Honduras, but it's very bad that he might be extradited to the U.S. because that is a violation of the sovereignty of Latin America, and it establishes a precedent for the U.S. government to try to extradite politicians, including former presidents, to the United States over crimes that they say it committed. Because the U.S. also falsely claims that Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro is a drug trafficker. That is completely ridiculous. It's completely absurd, but the U.S. government claims it. And if it succeeds in extraditing Ho, the Honduran narco leader that it put in power, if the U.S. succeeds in extraditing him to the U.S., then the U.S. might also try to extradite the non-drug trafficking, real democratic president of Venezuela, Maduro. So this is a dangerous precedent. And there are so many examples of this precedent. Here is another precedent in Latin America. The CIA being involved in the assassination of Trujillo, the horrible right-wing dictator of the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo Molina, who was supported by the U.S. government for many years as he was liquidating the left, massacring, imprisoning, exile, torturing leftists in the Dominican Republic. And then after he outlived his usefulness, the CIA helped assassinate Trujillo. They were involved in the assassination of Trujillo. Here's an article from the BBC titled, "I Shot the Cruelest Dictator in the Americas," back in 2011. Of course, Trujillo was strongly supported by the U.S. government. So they're admitting that the U.S. government supported one of the cruelest right-wing dictators in the Americas. And the CIA helped provide the weapons and it helped assassinate this dictator that it put in power and it supported. So what I'm saying here is that when we're looking at what's going on in Honduras, don't let the Biden administration try to rebrand and market what it's doing as clamping down supposedly on a drug trafficking Trump ally. Now, Ho was a major drug trafficker, but when he was trafficking those drugs, the U.S. government was supporting him. When he was using drug money to steal the elections in Honduras from the left, the U.S. was supporting him. So we need to be very clear about what's happening here. And this is a violation of Latin America's sovereignty. The Honduran government should be trying the narco-dictator and putting him in prison itself, not the U.S. government. U.S. hands off Latin America, period.